Sometimes life gives you a second chance when you least expect it. At 52 and 8 months pregnant, Quinn Dovall thought she'd left her past behind in the wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. She lived alone, off-grid, a former wilderness guide who wanted nothing more than peace. Then she found an abandoned train car for sale, deep in the old timber country. Something about it called to her, and she bought it without knowing why. When she stepped inside, she discovered it wasn't empty. Hidden beneath the rotted floor were things that connected to a family she'd been running from for 30 years. But Quinn wasn't the only one who knew about that train car. Someone had been watching those woods for a very long time. What was hidden inside that rusted train car? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Quinn Dovall woke before dawn, as she always did, to the sound of rain drumming on the metal roof of her cabin. At 52 and 8 months pregnant, getting out of bed had become an elaborate process involving strategic rolling, careful positioning, and a few moments of gathering courage. Her back ached in ways she'd never experienced in 3 decades of guiding expeditions through the Cascade Mountains. But she wouldn't trade this discomfort for anything. The cabin was small, just under 400 square feet, built with her own hands over the course of 2 years. It sat on 23 acres of dense forest in the coastal range of Washington state, accessible only by a 4-mile logging road that became impassable during heavy rains. She had no electricity beyond what her solar panels and battery bank could provide, no running water except what she collected from the roof and a nearby spring, and no internet connection. Her nearest neighbor, Vernon Pike, lived 6 miles away on the other side of the ridge. This isolation was exactly what she wanted. Quinn moved to the wood stove, stirring the coals and adding kindling until flames caught. The morning ritual soothed her. She filled her kettle with water from the 5-gallon jug by the sink and set it on the stove. While waiting for it to boil, she stood at the window and watched the forest emerge from darkness. The trees here were old-growth Douglas fir and western red cedar, some of them 300 years old or more. Moss covered everything, the ground, the fallen logs, even the lower branches of the trees. In the grey morning light, the forest looked primordial, unchanged since the last ice age. Quinn had always felt more at home among these trees than she ever had among people. She made herself a cup of nettle tea, adding a spoonful of honey from the jar Vernon had brought her last month. The baby kicked a strong thump against her ribs, and she placed her hand on her belly. "Good morning to you too," she said softly. The pregnancy had been a surprise. Quinn had assumed at her age that motherhood was no longer a possibility. She'd made peace with that years ago, or thought she had. Then she'd met a man named James at a wilderness medicine conference in Portland, the one professional gathering she still attended. He was a paramedic from Seattle, kind and undemanding, and they'd spent 3 days together that felt easy and natural. When she discovered she was pregnant 2 months later, she tried to contact him. The number he'd given her was disconnected. The email bounced back. She'd searched online but found nothing. It was as if he'd never existed. Eventually, she stopped looking. If he'd wanted to be found, he would have been. The baby was hers alone, and that felt right somehow. She'd spent her whole life running from family, from obligations, from the suffocating expectations of the Dovall name. This child would be different. This child would be born into freedom. Quinn moved to the small table, where she kept her journal. Next to it sat a hand-carved wooden compass her grandfather had made when she was 7 years old, before everything fell apart. It was one of the few objects she'd taken when she left home at 18. The compass no longer pointed true north. Something had bent the needle decades ago, but she kept it anyway. It reminded her of a time when she'd still believed her family could love her without conditions. Her grandfather, Samuel Dovall, had been a logging baron in the 1960s and 70s, running crews through these same mountains. The Dovall name meant something then: money, influence, the kind of old money respect that came from being among the first white families to settle the territory. Her father, Bernard, had inherited the business and the attitudes that came with it. Hard work was virtue, weakness was sin, and family reputation mattered more than individual happiness. Quinn had learned early that her family's love came with strings attached. Do what you're told. Marry the right person, produce the right kind of children. When she'd announced at 16 that she wanted to study wilderness ecology instead of business, her father had looked at her like she'd suggested burning down the family home. When she'd dated a boy from a logging family her father considered beneath them, Bernard had made sure the relationship ended. By 18, Quinn couldn't breathe in that house anymore. She left with a backpack and $200, and she never went back. She'd built a life in the wilderness instead. She became a certified guide, leading backpacking expeditions through the Olympics and the Cascades. She taught wilderness survival courses. She worked as a ranger for a few seasons. The forest asked nothing of her except respect, and it gave her everything she needed: solitude, purpose, peace. She bought this land 12 years ago with money saved from guiding. She built the cabin herself, learning as she went. And, for 12 years, she'd been happier than she'd ever been in her family's grand house, with its antique furniture and suffocating silences. The kettle whistled. Quinn poured hot water over oatmeal in a bowl and stirred in dried berries and nuts. She ate standing at the window, watching a Roosevelt elk move through the trees below the cabin. The animal paused, looked up at her window as if sensing her presence, then continued on its path. After breakfast, she pulled on her rain jacket and boots and stepped outside. The rain had softened to a mist. She made her way down the path to the outhouse, moving carefully on the wet boards. At 8 months pregnant, her center of gravity had shifted, and she had to think about every step. Vernon Pike would visit today if the roads were passable. He came once a month, sometimes more often lately, ostensibly to check his fence line that bordered her property. Really, he came to make sure she was still alive. He was 74, a retired millwright who'd worked in the lumber mills before they all closed. He lived alone on a small homestead he'd built in the 1980s. They'd become friends over the years, united by their preference for solitude and their mutual respect for self-reliance. Vernon didn't know about the dreams yet. Quinn hadn't told anyone. They'd started 3 months ago, vivid and insistent, always the same. She would be walking through the forest at dusk, following a path she didn't recognize. The trees would open onto an old railbed, and there, sitting on rusted tracks overgrown with ferns, would be a single train car. It was a logging car, the kind used to transport timber out of the mountains before the roads were built. The car was red once, but now it was mostly rust and moss. In the dream, she would approach the car and climb inside. The interior was dark, but she could see shapes, boxes, bundles, objects covered in tarps, and she could feel a presence, not threatening but urgent, as if something was trying to tell her something important. She would wake from these dreams with her heart racing and a single thought echoing in her mind: find it, find the train car. At first, she dismissed the dreams as pregnancy hormones, her mind processing anxiety about the baby in strange ways. But they kept coming, night after night, growing more detailed. She began to recognize landmarks in the dreams: a particular curve in the creek, a lightning-struck cedar, a rock formation shaped like a bear's head. These were real places, all within a few miles of her cabin. 2 weeks ago, she'd given in to the compulsion. She loaded her pack and hiked out to the old logging areas, following the railbed that had once connected these mountains to the mills on the coast. The rails had been pulled up decades ago, sold for scrap, but the bed remained, a scar through the forest, slowly being reclaimed by nature. And she'd found it. The train car from her dreams, sitting exactly where she'd seen it, in exactly the same state of decay. It shouldn't have been possible. She'd hiked these woods for years and never noticed it, but there it was, real and solid, waiting. There was a hand-painted sign wired to a tree nearby. For sale. Inquire at Pike's store. Pike's store was Vernon's cousin's place, a general store and gas station 30 miles down the mountain. Quinn had driven there the next day, her truck rattling over the rutted roads, and asked about the train car. Vernon's cousin, a taciturn man named Dennis, had looked surprised anyone was interested. That old thing? Belongs to the Railroad Historical Society, I think. They've been trying to sell it for years. $100, and it's yours. Nobody wants to haul it out. Quinn had written a check on the spot. She didn't know why. The compulsion was too strong to resist. The train car was hers now, legally purchased, though she had no idea what she would do with it. She hadn't gone back to examine it more closely yet. Something held her back, not fear exactly, but a sense that once she truly investigated the car's interior, something would change irrevocably. Her life, which had been so carefully controlled and isolated, would crack open. But the dreams hadn't stopped. If anything, they'd intensified. Now, when she dreamed of the train car, she could hear a voice calling her name, a woman's voice, familiar somehow, though Quinn couldn't place it. The sound of a truck engine broke her thoughts. Vernon's old Ford was making its way up the road, diesel engine clattering. Quinn walked to the edge of the clearing as he pulled up and parked. Vernon climbed out slowly, favoring his left knee. He was tall and lean, weathered by decades of outdoor work, with a white beard he kept neatly trimmed, and blue eyes that missed nothing. "Morning, Quinn," he said, touching the brim of his cap. "Roads are holding up all right. Thought I'd better check on you." "I'm fine," she said. "Come in and have some coffee." They walked back to the cabin together. Vernon had a bag of supplies, fresh eggs from his chickens, a loaf of bread his daughter had baked, and a jar of salmon he'd canned last fall. He never made a fuss about bringing things, just set them on her counter as if they were ordinary, neighborly exchanges, though Quinn knew he refused to take anything in return. She made coffee in her French press while Vernon settled into the chair by the stove. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, drinking coffee and listening to the rain pick up again outside. "Dennis mentioned you bought that old train car," Vernon said finally. "Didn't know you were interested in railroad relics." Quinn cupped her hands around her mug. "I found it while hiking. Seemed like something worth preserving." Vernon studied her with those sharp eyes. "That car's been sitting there since the 50s, maybe earlier. Part of the old Dovall timber line." Quinn's head snapped up. "What? Your family's operation? Your grandfather ran logging trains through here until the roads came in. That was one of the cars they left behind when they pulled up the rails." Vernon paused. "You didn't know?" "No." Quinn's voice sounded strange to her own ears. "I had no idea. Well, it's yours now, I suppose. In a way, it always was." Vernon sipped his coffee. "You planning to do anything with it?" "I don't know yet," Quinn said. "I need to go back and look at it more carefully, see what condition it's really in." What she didn't say. "I need to understand why it's been calling to me in my dreams. I need to know what's inside. I need to understand why my family's history is reaching out to me now, after all these years of keeping it at bay." Vernon left an hour later after checking that she had enough firewood split and stacked. He made her promise to radio him if the baby came early. She had a two-way radio for emergencies, though she'd only used it once in 12 years, when she'd broken her ankle and needed help getting down the mountain to the clinic. After he was gone, Quinn stood at her window and looked toward the forest where the train car waited. The baby kicked again, insistent, as if urging her forward. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow she would go back to the train car and face whatever secrets her family had left rusting in the woods. Quinn set out at first light, her pack loaded with tools, a flashlight, work gloves, and water. The hike to the train car would take about 90 minutes at her current pace, moving carefully over uneven ground. She'd told herself she was just going to assess the structure, maybe clear some of the brush around it, begin the practical work of preservation, but she knew she was lying to herself. She was going because she had to know what was inside. The morning was clear and cold, the kind of crystalline autumn day that made the forest glow. Shafts of sunlight cut through the canopy, illuminating the moss and ferns in shades of impossible green. Quinn followed the old railbed, her boots crunching on gravel that had been laid down 70 years ago. In some places, the forest had completely reclaimed the path. In others, the cut through the trees was still visible, a corridor leading deeper into the mountains. She recognized the landmarks from her dreams. Now, the lightning-struck cedar, split down the middle but still alive, its bark blackened but new growth emerging from the wound. The rock formation that looked like a bear's profile when viewed from a certain angle. The creek that ran alongside the railbed, swollen with recent rain, its water dark as tea from tannins leached from the cedar roots. And then, around a bend in the path, there it was. The train car sat canted slightly to one side, its wheels long since rusted to immobility. It was a boxcar, probably 40 feet long, with sliding doors on each side. The wood siding was mostly rotted away, revealing the metal frame beneath. Moss covered every surface, thick as fur, and ferns grew from the roof where soil had accumulated. A young hemlock had taken root at one end, its roots working into the seams of the car. It should have looked derelict, abandoned, dead. But standing there in the morning light, Quinn felt the same pull she'd felt in her dreams. The train car was waiting for something. For her. She approached slowly, placed her hand on the metal frame. It was cold and rough with rust, but solid. The structure had held up remarkably well, despite decades of exposure. Her grandfather had built things to last. The sliding door on the near side was stuck, jammed in its track by rust and debris. Quinn set down her pack and worked at it with a pry bar, feeling the baby shift uncomfortably as she strained. The door groaned, metal scraping against metal, and finally gave way. It slid open about 3 feet, enough for her to squeeze through. The smell hit her first: damp wood, rust, earth, and something else she couldn't quite identify. Old paper, maybe. Leather. The accumulated scent of decades undisturbed. Quinn pulled out her flashlight and shone it into the interior. The car was filled with debris, rotted tarps, broken crates, rusted tools. But along one wall, she could see something that didn't belong. A shelf, built into the wall, with objects arranged on it. Deliberately placed, not just abandoned. She climbed inside carefully, testing each step. The floor creaked but held. Her light swept across the space, revealing more details. Someone had spent time here. There were marks on the walls, scratches, maybe writing, too faded to read. A pile of fabric in one corner that might have been blankets once. An old lantern hanging from a hook. This hadn't just been a storage car. Someone had used it as a shelter. Quinn moved toward the shelf, her heart pounding. On it, she found a leather journal, surprisingly well preserved, protected from the worst of the weather by its position against the wall. Next to it, a small wooden box, a woman's ring, and several photographs in a plastic sleeve that had kept them safe from moisture. She picked up the journal with trembling hands. The leather was soft and worn, the pages yellowed but intact. She opened to the first page and saw handwriting, elegant and precise, dated June 1974. My name is Estelle Dovall, and if you're reading this, something has gone terribly wrong. Quinn's breath caught. Estelle, her father's sister, the aunt who had disappeared when Quinn was just a baby, whose name was never spoken in the Dovall household, whose existence had been erased so thoroughly that Quinn hadn't even known she existed until she was 12 and found an old family photo in the attic. She'd asked her mother about the woman standing next to her father in the picture, and her mother had gone pale. "We don't talk about Estelle," she'd said, and that had been the end of it. When Quinn had pressed her father later, he'd gotten angry. In that cold, controlled way he had, Estelle made her choices. She's dead to this family. Quinn had assumed her aunt had done something unforgivable, married the wrong man maybe, or run off and embarrassed the family. In the Dovall household, reputation was everything, and deviation from the family's expectations was the worst sin imaginable. But now, holding Estelle's journal in her hands, standing in what must have been her hiding place, Quinn understood that the story was more complicated than she'd imagined. She turned the pages carefully, reading by flashlight. Estelle's entries were detailed, painting a picture of a young woman trapped by her family's expectations. She was 26 in 1974, teaching at the local elementary school, living at home because unmarried daughters didn't live alone. She wrote about feeling suffocated, about arguments with her father, Quinn's grandfather, about her future. And then, in July, everything changed. Estelle had fallen in love. "His name is Thomas Whitfield," she wrote. "He's a timber scout, works for the Forest Service, knows these mountains better than anyone I've ever met. He's kind and gentle, and when he looks at me, I feel seen for the first time in my life. But my family will never accept him. They'll never accept us." Quinn read on, her throat tight. The reason was clear. Thomas was native, from the Quinault nation, and the Dovall family, with their old money and older prejudices, would rather die than accept a native man into the family. Estelle and Thomas had tried to keep their relationship secret, meeting in the forest, in this train car that sat on land, her family controlled but rarely visited. They'd made plans to leave together, to start over somewhere. Her family name meant nothing. But in August, Estelle discovered she was pregnant. The entries became more frantic after that. Her family had found out somehow. Her father and brother Bernard, Quinn's father, had confronted her, threatened. Quinn, told her she would give the baby up for adoption and never speak of Thomas again. They'd threatened Thomas too, though Estelle didn't specify what they'd said. Quinn turned to the photographs. The plastic sleeve held 4 pictures. The first showed a young woman with long dark hair and serious eyes, standing in front of the very train car Quinn now occupied. The resemblance to Quinn was striking: the same square jaw, the same direct gaze. The second photo showed Estelle with a man who must be Thomas. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with long black hair pulled back, wearing work clothes. They stood together in the forest, his arm around her shoulders, both of them looking at the camera with expressions that were equal parts love and fear. The third photo was of the train car's interior, cleaner than it was now, set up almost like a tiny apartment. There was a camp bed, a small stove, shelves with supplies, their refuge. The fourth photo made Quinn's hands shake. It showed Estelle, clearly pregnant, holding up a piece of paper to the camera. On it she'd written, "Kenna, the 15th of July, 1974. A birth announcement. Estelle had given birth. The baby was real. Quinn flipped through the remaining pages of the journal, her pulse racing. The last few entries were dated late August, early September. Estelle wrote about having the baby at a county hospital, about how they'd taken her daughter immediately, about how her family had arranged an adoption without her consent. She was frantic, trying to find out where Kenna had been taken, desperate to get her back. The final entry was dated the 3rd of September 1974. "Thomas and I are meeting here tonight. We have a plan. He knows people who can help us, who will testify that the adoption was coerced. We're going to get Kenna back, and then we're leaving. I don't care what my family does. I don't care if they disown me. My daughter deserves to know her mother. Thomas and I deserve to be a family. If I don't make it, if something goes wrong, I want whoever finds this to know that I loved my daughter. I wanted her. I fought for her. Her name is Kenna Whitfield, and she should know that her mother never gave her up willingly. That was the last entry. The pages after were blank. Quinn sat down heavily on a broken crate, the journal in her lap. Her mind was reeling. Estelle had died that night, the 3rd of September, 1974, or disappeared at least. And Thomas had vanished too. The official story, the little Quinn had been able to piece together over the years, was that Estelle had run away, abandoned her family, and never been heard from again. But Quinn knew her family. She knew how they operated. She knew what they were capable of when their reputation was threatened. A sound outside the train car made her freeze. Footsteps, deliberate and careful, moving through the underbrush. Someone was out there. Quinn switched off her flashlight and moved to the door, peering out. She could see movement in the trees, a figure walking away, tall and upright. A man, she thought, though it was hard to tell. He wore clothes that looked strange, outdated heavy canvas work pants, a plaid wool shirt, a hat she couldn't quite make out. He moved with purpose, following a path she couldn't see, and then he simply disappeared into the shadows between the trees. Her heart hammered. She waited 5 minutes, listening, but heard nothing more. No footsteps, no breaking branches, just the normal sounds of the forest birds, wind, the distant rush of the creek. When she was sure whoever it was had gone, Quinn gathered the journal, the photos, and the wooden box. She couldn't stay here any longer. She needed time to think, to process what she'd found. And she needed to decide what to do with this information. As she climbed out of the train car, something caught her eye. Fresh carvings on a nearby alder tree, marks that definitely hadn't been there before. They looked like symbols, deliberate cuts into the bark. She moved closer to examine them and felt a chill run down her spine. The marks formed letters, crude but readable. Truth. Someone else knew about this place. Someone had been watching her. And they wanted her to find the truth. Quinn shouldered her pack and started back toward her cabin, moving as quickly as her pregnant body would allow. The weight of Estelle's journal pressed against her back, and with it, the weight of a secret that had been buried for 30 years. By the time she reached her cabin, her legs were shaking from exertion, and her mind was racing. She locked the door behind her, something she rarely did, and set the items from the train car on her table. She made tea with shaking hands and sat down to read the journal again, more carefully this time, looking for clues about what had really happened to Estelle and Thomas. The baby kicked hard, as if responding to Quinn's agitation. She placed her hand on her belly, trying to calm herself. But one thought kept echoing in her mind. Estelle had a daughter, Kenna Whitfield. If she was still alive, she would be 50 years old now, and she would have no idea who her real mother was or what had happened to her. Quinn knew what she had to do. She had to find Kenna. She had to tell her the truth, and she had to figure out what happened to Estelle and Thomas on that September night in 1974. Outside, the afternoon light was fading. Quinn looked toward the window and saw, just for a moment, a figure standing at the edge of the tree line, the same tall figure from the train car, watching her cabin. She blinked, and it was gone. But the message was clear. This wasn't over. The past wasn't done with her yet. Quinn didn't sleep that night. She sat at her table with the journal open, reading and rereading Estelle's words by lamplight, trying to piece together what had happened. The baby moved restlessly inside her, and she had to keep reminding herself to breathe slowly, to stay calm. By the dawn, she'd read the entire journal 3 times and formed a picture of Estelle's life that made her chest ache. Her aunt had been kind, idealistic, desperate for a life beyond the suffocating confines of the Dovall family. She'd loved teaching, loved the mountains, loved Thomas with a fierce certainty that came through in every word. And she'd loved her baby, Kenna, with protective ferocity, even though she'd only held her for a few hours before the baby was taken away. Quinn made coffee as the sun rose, her movements automatic. She kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see the figure again, but the forest was empty, except for the usual morning activity. The wooden box sat on the table, still unopened. Quinn picked it up now, examining it carefully. It was cedar, hand-carved with simple geometric patterns, the kind of box someone made with care. As a gift. She opened it slowly. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were letters. A thick stack of them, tied with string. Quinn untied the bundle and unfolded the first letter carefully. "My dearest Estelle," it began. The handwriting was different from the journal's, stronger, more angular. "I'm writing this at the lookout station, watching the sun go down over the mountains. I keep thinking about last Sunday, about walking with you by the river, about how you fit perfectly under my arm when we stood looking at the water. I've never felt this way about anyone." Quinn's throat tightened. These were Thomas's letters to Estelle. She read through them one by one, watching their relationship develop through his words. He wrote about the forest, about his work, about the Quinault traditions his grandmother had taught him. He wrote about dreams of a future with Estelle, about the life they could build together away from her family's judgment. In later letters, after Estelle discovered she was pregnant, his tone changed. He became protective, determined. "I'll keep you safe," he wrote. "Both of you. I don't care what your family thinks or does. We'll find a way." The last letter was dated the 2nd of September 1974, the day before Estelle's final journal entry. "Meet me at the train car tomorrow night, after dark. I've talked to a lawyer in Aberdeen. He says we have a case for getting Kenna back. The adoption was rushed, and you never gave proper consent. We'll need to act quickly, but we can do this. Pack light. We'll go straight from the train car to Aberdeen, stay with my cousin there until the legal papers are filed. I love you. We're going to be okay." But they hadn't been okay. Something had gone wrong that night, and neither Estelle nor Thomas had ever been seen again. Quinn turned to the photographs, studying them carefully. The one of Estelle and Thomas together, she looked at the background, trying to identify the location. It was somewhere in the forest, near water. She could see part of a structure in the background, what might be a cabin, the photo of baby Kenna's birth. The announcement gave her a concrete detail, the 15th of July, 1974. Quinn pulled out her laptop, one of the few pieces of technology she kept charged via her solar panel. She had limited internet access through a satellite connection, expensive and slow, but functional for basic research. She searched for Estelle Dovall. The results were sparse. A mention in a 1974 local newspaper about a missing woman with few details. A brief obituary from 1975 stating that Estelle Dovall was presumed deceased after being missing for more than a year. No mention of circumstances, no mention of Thomas, no mention of a baby. She searched for Thomas Whitfield next. Even less. No obituary, no missing person report, nothing. It was as if he'd never existed. Quinn sat back, frustrated. Her family had made sure both Estelle and Thomas disappeared, not just physically but from the record. It would have been easy enough in 1974, with the family's influence. The baby kicked hard. She was 8 months pregnant, running on no sleep, digging into a 30-year-old mystery that her family had clearly wanted buried. This was probably not wise. But she couldn't stop. Estelle deserved better than to be erased. Thomas deserved to be remembered. And Kenna, wherever she was, deserved to know the truth about her parents. The sound of a truck engine pulled Quinn from her thoughts. She looked out to see Vernon's Ford, much earlier than his usual visit. She went outside to meet him, noting the concerned expression on his face. "Morning," he said. "I know I was just here yesterday, but something's been bothering me. That train car business." "Come in," Quinn said. "I found some things you need to see." They went inside, and Quinn made fresh coffee while Vernon examined the journal and letters. She watched his face as he read, seeing recognition and something else, sadness maybe, or guilt. Finally, he set the journal down. "I remember Estelle," he said quietly. "I was younger then, working at the mill. But I remember her. She was kind, used to teach my nephew." "What do you remember about her disappearance?" Quinn asked. Vernon was quiet for a long moment. "There was talk," he said finally. "The official story was that she ran off. But there were rumors. People said her family found out she was involved with Thomas Whitfield, and they weren't happy about it. Some folks thought maybe Bernard and your grandfather did something to them both. Did anyone investigate? Not really. Your grandfather was a powerful man. The sheriff at the time was in his pocket. When Estelle was reported missing, they did a cursory search, but their heart wasn't in it." Vernon paused. "I never believed they ran off together. Thomas loved these woods. He wouldn't have just left." Quinn showed him the photograph. Vernon studied it, then nodded. "That's him. Good man. I worked with him a few times when the Forest Service was doing surveys. He knew the land better than anyone." "What about the baby?" Quinn asked. "Did you know Estelle had a daughter?" Vernon's eyebrows rose. "I didn't know that." Quinn showed him the birth announcement photo. "Her name was Kenna Whitfield. Born the 15th of July, 1974. She'd be 50 now. Do you think she's still alive?" "I don't know. But I want to find out." Quinn paused. "Vernon, I think something happened to Estelle and Thomas that night in September. I think my family was responsible." She told him about the figure she'd seen, the carved message. Vernon listened gravely. "You need to be careful," he said. "If your family covered something up 30 years ago, they might not appreciate you digging it up now." "My father is 82, Quinn said, "and I haven't spoken to him in 30 years. I'm not afraid of him." But even as she said it, she felt a flicker of the old fear. After Vernon left, Quinn made a list. She needed to find where Kenna had been placed, search county birth records, find out more about the 3rd of September 1974. But first, she needed rest. She lay down, intending to sleep for just an hour. She dreamed of Estelle. This time, Estelle stood in the train car holding a baby crying. "Tell her," Estelle said, looking at Quinn. "Tell her I loved her. Tell her I tried." Quinn woke with tears on her face and deep certainty she would find Kenna, whatever it took. Quinn woke from her brief sleep with renewed determination. The dream of Estelle had felt less like a product of her unconscious mind and more like a message, a plea from across 3 decades of silence. She made herself eat something, scrambled eggs and toast, knowing she needed to keep her strength up for the baby's sake, even though her stomach was tight with anxiety. She spent the morning going through the remaining contents of the wooden box more carefully. Beneath the letters, she found a small cloth bag. Inside was a tarnished silver locket, the kind that opened to reveal photographs. Quinn's hands trembled as she worked the tiny clasp. The hinge was stiff with age, but it finally gave way. Inside the locket were 2 things: a tiny photograph, barely an inch across, of a newborn baby with a shock of dark hair, and a lock of that same dark hair tied with a thin pink ribbon. Quinn held the locket up to the light, examining the baby's face. Even in the grainy, faded photograph, she could see the resemblance to Estelle, the same nose, the same shape of the eyes. This was Kenna. This was the daughter Estelle had held for just a few hours before she was taken away. Quinn turned back to the journal, looking for any mention of the locket. She found it in an entry from late July, a week after Kenna's birth. "They let me see her for 10 minutes today," Estelle had written. "Just 10 minutes. I held her and memorized every detail of her face. She has Thomas's eyes and my nose. She made little sounds, not quite crying, just small noises like she was trying to talk to me. I put a lock of her hair in the locket Thomas gave me. It's all I have left of her now. They say the adoption will be final next week. They say it's for the best, that I'm too young, that the circumstances are wrong. But they're lying. This is about control. This is about erasing what they see as a mistake. But she's not a mistake. She's my daughter. And somehow, some way, I'm going to get her back. Quinn closed her eyes, feeling the weight of Estelle's grief across the years. She understood now why Estelle and Thomas had been so desperate, why they'd been willing to risk everything for one more chance. They'd been trying to reclaim what had been stolen from them. She continued reading, discovering entries that became more frantic as September approached. Estelle wrote about her family's increasing pressure, about threats made against Thomas, about her father, Quinn's grandfather Samuel, telling her that if she didn't cooperate, Thomas would face consequences. The word consequences was underlined 3 times in the journal. Estelle also wrote about the adoption agency, Blessed Shepherd Adoptions, affiliated with the church the Dovall family had attended for generations. She'd tried to find out where Kenna had been placed, but the agency refused to tell her anything. They said the records were sealed, that it was better for everyone if she moved on and forgot. But Estelle hadn't been able to forget. In her final entries, she wrote about Thomas's plan to get Kenna back through legal channels, about the lawyer in Aberdeen who thought they had a case. She wrote about packing a small bag, about the hope she felt for the first time in weeks, and then nothing. The journal ended on that note of fragile hope, and Estelle had simply vanished. Quinn realized she now had enough information to start a real search. She had the adoption agency's name, a birth date, and the baby's original name, Kenna Whitfield. It was more than many people had when searching for adoption records. She made a decision. She needed to go to town, to the county seat where the hospital and courthouse were located. It was a 3-hour drive on winding mountain roads, not ideal this late in her pregnancy, but she couldn't wait. Every day that passed was a day Kenna lived without knowing the truth about her mother. Quinn packed carefully water, snacks, her phone fully charged, the journal and photographs, and a letter she'd written the night before explaining everything. If something happened to her, if the baby came early, she wanted Vernon to have the information to continue the search. She left the letter on her kitchen table with Vernon's name on the envelope, then locked up the cabin and climbed into her truck. The drive down the mountain was slow and careful. Her truck was old, a 1990 Ford that she'd maintained herself, and it complained on the steep grades. But it was reliable, and it knew these roads as well as she did. As she drove, Quinn thought about her own pregnancy, about how different her experience was from Estelle's. She was bringing this baby into the world on her own terms, in a place she'd chosen, surrounded by forest and solitude. No one would take this child from her. No one would tell her she wasn't fit to be a mother because of her age or her circumstances or her choices. But Estelle hadn't had that freedom. Estelle had been trapped by family expectations and social prejudice, and it had cost her everything. The county seat was a small town called Harbour Ridge, built on the remains of what had once been a bustling logging community. Most of the mills had closed in the 80s, and the town had shrunk with them. But the courthouse and hospital remained, solid brick buildings from an earlier era. Quinn parked near the courthouse and made her way inside, moving slowly, one hand supporting her belly. The building was quiet, just a few people moving through the halls. She found the records office on the 2nd floor and approached the counter, where a woman in her 60s sat behind a computer. "I'm looking for a birth certificate," Quinn said, "from 1974. The woman looked up, taking in Quinn's obvious pregnancy with a knowing smile. "Doing some family history research?" "Something like that," Quinn said. She gave the details. Kenna Whitfield, born the 15th of July 1974 at Harbour Ridge Hospital. The woman typed into her computer, then frowned. "I'm showing a record, but it's flagged as sealed. That usually means it was part of an adoption. You'd need a court order to access the full record." Quinn had expected this. What about the hospital? Would they have records? They might have some archived records, but again, if it was an adoption, a lot of that information would be protected. Are you family? Quinn hesitated, then decided on the truth. She was my cousin. Her mother died shortly after the adoption, and I'm trying to find her. The woman's expression softened. I'm sorry to hear that. Let me see what I can do. She made a phone call, spoke to someone in low tones, then turned back to Quinn. The hospital archivist can see you this afternoon if you want to go over there. Her name is Linda Chen. She might be able to help you, at least tell you what's possible. Quinn thanked her and made her way back to her truck. The hospital was only a few blocks away, a 2-story building that had been expanded several times over the decades. She found the administrative offices and asked for Linda Chen. The archivist was a small, efficient woman in her 40s who led Quinn to a basement office filled with filing cabinets and boxes. 1,974, she said, pulling out a large ledger. We didn't computerize until the 90s, so everything from before then is still on paper. She ran her finger down columns of names, found the entry, and pulled out a file. Here we are. Whitfield Kenner, born the 15th of July, 1974, at 3:17 inches the morning. Mother, Estelle Dovall. Father, Thomas Whitfield. She looked up at Quinn. You said your family? Estelle was my aunt, Quinn said. Linda nodded slowly. The baby was placed for adoption through Blessed Shepherd Adoptions 2 days after birth. That agency closed in 1986 after some legal troubles. There were allegations of coerced adoptions, improper procedures. A lot of their records were sealed by court order, but some information was transferred to the state system. Is there any way to find out where she was placed? Quinn asked. Or what name she was given? Linda was quiet for a moment, clearly wrestling with what she could ethically share. Finally, she said, I can tell you that the adoption was arranged prior to birth. The adoptive parents were pre-selected, which was common in private adoptions at that time. And I can tell you that the family who adopted her was local, from within the county. Quinn's heart beat faster. Local? Do you have a name? I can't give you that without proper authorization. But, Linda paused, seemed to make a decision. The agency kept a list of families they worked with. That list is part of the public record now, after the investigation in the 80s. You might be able to cross-reference it with other information you have. She pulled out a photocopy of a document, a list of names, addresses, and dates. These are the families who adopted through Blessed Shepherd between 1,970 and 1,980. If your cousin was adopted locally, her family would be on this list. Quinn took the document with shaking hands. There were perhaps 50 names, arranged by year. She found 1974 and scanned down the list. Most of the families had addresses in towns she didn't recognize, but one name made her stop cold. Ross, Howard, and Patricia, Forks, Washington. July 1974. Forks. That was only 40 miles from her cabin, a small logging town on the Olympic Peninsula. Quinn had been there a dozen times for supplies. Is there any way to verify this was the family? Quinn asked. Linda looked at the entry, then back at her. File. The dates match, and I can tell you that the adoptive family in this case was approved by the birth mother's family, which was unusual. Typically, the agency made those decisions, but in this case, there were notes indicating that the Dovall family had specifically requested this placement. Quinn felt a cold certainty settle over her. Her grandfather had chosen where Kenner would go. He'd maintained control even over that, making sure the baby was placed somewhere he could monitor, somewhere that wouldn't threaten the family's reputation but would keep the bloodline close. It was exactly the kind of thing Samuel Dovall would do. Thank you, Quinn said. This helps more than you know. Linda handed her the photocopy. I hope you find her, and I hope it brings you both some peace. Quinn left the hospital and sat in her truck for a long time, staring at the name. Kenna Ross. It had to be her. The timing was right, the location made sense, and the fact that her grandfather had arranged it fit perfectly with everything she knew about her family. She pulled out her phone and searched for Kenna Ross, Forks, Washington. Several results came up, but one stood out. A small business listing for Ross Woodworking Custom Furniture and Restoration. Owner, Kenna Ross. There was an address, a phone number, and a website. Quinn clicked through to the website and found a photo of the owner. A woman in her 50s with long dark hair, streaked with grey, strong features, and serious eyes that looked hauntingly familiar. She looked like Estelle. She looked like Quinn. She looked like family. Quinn sat in her truck, her hand on her belly, feeling the baby move. She'd found her. After 30 years of being hidden, erased, kept secret, Kenna was just 40 miles away, living her life, completely unaware that her birth mother had loved her, had fought for her, had died, trying to get her back. Quinn started the truck and began the drive home. Tomorrow she would go. To Forks. Tomorrow she would meet Kenna and tell her the truth. But tonight she needed to prepare. She needed to figure out exactly what she was going to say to a woman whose entire understanding of her origins was about to be upended. The drive back up the mountain seemed longer than usual. By the time Quinn reached her cabin, the sun was setting and her body ached with exhaustion. But her mind was racing, already composing the words she would use, already imagining the meeting. She made herself a simple dinner, then sat at her table and wrote out everything she knew, creating a timeline of events. She wanted to present Kenna with clear facts, not just emotion and speculation. As darkness fell, Quinn heard a sound outside the now familiar presence of the watcher. She went to the window and saw the tall figure again, standing at the edge of the clearing. This time, instead of fear, she felt something else. Recognition, maybe, or gratitude. Whoever was watching over this place, whether it was a living person who knew the truth or something less tangible, they'd led her to the journal. They'd guided her to the truth. And now she was going to honor that by giving Kenna back her history. Quinn placed her hand on the window glass, a gesture of acknowledgement. The figure stood still for a moment longer, then turned and walked back into the forest, disappearing into the darkness between the trees. Quinn woke before dawn with a sense of purpose stronger than any she'd felt in years. Today, she would drive to Forks and find Kenna. She dressed carefully, choosing clean jeans and a soft flannel shirt, wanting to look presentable but not formal. She packed a bag with the journal, the photographs, the locket, and the letters, all the physical evidence of Estelle and Thomas's love and loss. Before leaving, she studied the website for Ross Woodworking more carefully. The gallery showed beautiful pieces, tables made from reclaimed wood, chairs with intricate joinery, cabinets with hand-carved details. The work showed skill and artistry, patience and attention to detail. Quinn found herself hoping that Kenna had found happiness in her craft, that her life had been good despite the circumstances of her adoption. The drive to Forks took just over an hour on roads that wound through dense forest. The town itself was small, perhaps 3,000 people, with a main street lined with businesses that catered to loggers, fishermen, and the occasional tourist heading to the coast. Quinn found the address for Ross Woodworking easily. It was a workshop and showroom on the edge of town, a building that had clearly once been something else, maybe a garage or small warehouse. She parked across the street and sat for a moment, gathering her courage. Through the large windows of the showroom, she could see finished pieces of furniture, and beyond that, the workshop itself. A woman was working at a table saw, her back to the window, safety glasses on, completely absorbed in her work. Quinn climbed out of her truck, one hand supporting her belly, and crossed the street. A bell chimed when she opened the door. The woman at the saw looked up, switched off the machine, and pulled off her safety glasses. Up close, the resemblance to Estelle was even more striking. She had the same bone structure, the same direct gaze, though her eyes were lighter. Thomas's eyes, Quinn realized. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, wiping sawdust from her hands. "Are you Kenna Ross?" Quinn asked, though she already knew the answer. "I am. Are you looking for custom work? Or—" She paused, taking in Quinn's pregnant state with a sympathetic smile. "Maybe something for a nursery?" "Actually, I came to talk to you about something else," Quinn said. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "My name is Quinn Dovall. I believe we're cousins." Kenna's expression shifted from friendly to guarded. "Dovall? I don't know any Dovalls." "Your birth mother was Estelle Dovall," Quinn said gently. "My aunt. She died in 1974, shortly after you were born." The color drained from Kenna's face. She reached out to steady herself against the workbench. "I think you should leave," she said, but her voice was uncertain. "Please," Quinn said. "I know this is a shock, but I have things that belong to your mother, things I think you should see. I'm not here to upset you. I'm here because you deserve to know the truth about where you came from." Kenna stared at her for a long moment, conflict clear on her face. Finally, she said, "You'd better come to the back. I don't want to have this conversation in the showroom." She led Quinn through the workshop to a small office at the rear of the building. It was cluttered but organized, filled with design sketches, wood samples, and photographs of completed projects. Kenna gestured to a chair, and Quinn sat gratefully, her back aching from the drive. "I've known I was adopted since I was 7, Kenna said, sitting across from her. "My parents, Howard and Patricia Ross, they told me when I asked why I didn't look like them. They said my birth mother was very young, that she couldn't take care of me, and that the adoption was the best thing for everyone. They said they didn't know much about her." "Did they ever mention the name Dovall?" Quinn asked. "No, never." Kenna's hands were clasped tightly in her lap. "What do you mean she died? Was she sick?" "I don't know exactly what happened," Quinn said carefully, "but I've been piecing together what I can find, and I think you should see this." She pulled out the journal and handed it to Kenna. "This belonged to your mother. She kept it in 1974, during the months before and after you were born." Kenna took the journal with trembling hands, opened it to the first page, and began to read. Quinn watched her face as she read Estelle's words, saw the shock, the grief, the dawning understanding of what had happened. When Kenna reached the entries about being pregnant, about the Dovall family's reaction, about Thomas, tears began streaming down her face. "She wanted me," Kenna whispered. "She didn't give me up willingly." "No," Quinn said. "She fought for you. She and your father both did." "My father?" Kenna looked up. "The Rosses told me they didn't know anything about him." Quinn pulled out the photograph of Estelle and Thomas together. His name was Thomas Whitfield. He was a timber scout for the Forest Service. He and your mother were in love. They planned to get married, to raise you together. But my family, the Dovalls, they didn't approve. Thomas was native, from the Quinault Nation, and my grandfather couldn't accept that. Kenna stared at the photograph, her fingers tracing Thomas's face. "I'm native?" she whispered. "Half native?" "Yes. Your father was Quinault." Kenna set down the photograph and pressed her hands to her face. Quinn could see her shoulders shaking. After a moment she looked up, her eyes red. "I always felt like something was missing, like there was a part of my identity I didn't understand. The Rosses were good parents, they loved me, they gave me everything I needed. But I never felt like I quite belonged. And now I know why." Quinn handed her the locket. "Your mother wore this. Inside is your baby picture and a lock of your hair. She wrote about it in her journal. It was the only thing she had left of you." Kenna opened the locket and stared at the tiny photograph and the lock of hair. Her tears fell onto the silver surface, and she made no move to wipe them away. "What happened to them?" she asked. "To my parents, my birth parents? They disappeared on the 3rd of September 1974, Quinn said. "They were planning to meet at an old train car. It was their secret place. Thomas had found a lawyer who could help them challenge the adoption. They were going to try to get you back, but they never made it out of the woods." "You think they were killed?" Kenna's voice was barely audible. "I don't know for certain," Quinn said. "But yes, I think it's possible. My grandfather was a powerful man, and my father, your Uncle Bernard, he was his enforcer. If they felt the family's reputation was threatened, I believe they were capable of violence." Kenna was quiet for a long time, processing. Finally she said, "Why are you telling me this now? After all these years?" Quinn placed her hand on her belly. "Because I'm about to become a mother myself, and I couldn't bear the thought of you living your whole life without knowing that your mother loved you, that she wanted you, that she died trying to protect you. You deserve to know the truth." "Do you have any proof?" Kenna asked. "About what happened to them?" "Not yet," Quinn admitted, "but I'm looking. Your mother's journal mentioned a map, and there were markings on trees near the train car. I think there might be evidence buried in those woods. I just haven't been able to investigate fully because," she gestured to her pregnant belly, "because this has made things complicated." Kenna stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the street. Quinn waited, giving her time to process. After several minutes, Kenna turned back. "I want to help," she said. "I want to find out what really happened. Can you show me? The train car, where they planned to meet?" "It's on my family's old property," Quinn said, "or what used to be our property. It's remote, not an easy hike. But yes, I can show you, though maybe we should wait until after my baby is born." "No," Kenna said firmly. "I've waited 50 years already. I don't want to wait any longer." "When can we go?" Quinn hesitated, thinking about the risks. But looking at Kenna's face, seeing the determination there, the same determination Estelle had shown in her journal, she understood. This woman had a right to know where she came from, to see the place her parents had loved, to search for answers. "Tomorrow," Quinn said, "meet me at this address at dawn." She wrote down directions to her cabin. "It's a few miles hike from there to the train car. Bring good boots and be prepared for rough terrain." Kenna nodded. "I'll be there." She paused. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for caring enough to tell me the truth." "Your family," Quinn said simply. "That means something, even if I only just found you." As Quinn drove home, she felt both relief and apprehension. She'd done what she set out to do. She'd found Kenna and told her the truth. But now came the harder part. Finding out what had really happened to Estelle and Thomas, and confronting the possibility that her own father had been involved in their deaths. Kenna arrived at Quinn's cabin just as the sun was rising, driving a weathered pickup that had seen better days. She dressed for hiking, good boots, sturdy pants, a pack on her shoulders. Quinn met her outside, noting the determined set of her jaw and the shadows under her eyes that suggested she hadn't slept much. "Ready?" Quinn asked. "I've been ready for 50 years, Kenna replied. "I just didn't know what I was waiting for." They set out along the old rail, moving slowly to accommodate Quinn's pace. The morning was cool and clear, perfect hiking weather. As they walked, Kenna talked about her life growing up in Forks, learning woodworking from her adoptive father, taking over his business when he retired. She'd married young, divorced in her 30s, had no children. She'd always felt something was incomplete, but she'd built a good life anyway. "The Rosses were kind people," she said. "I don't want to dishonor them by being angry about the adoption, but I wish they'd told me more. I wish they'd been honest about my origins." "They might not have known the full truth themselves," Quinn said. "My family was good at controlling information. When they reached the train car, Kenna stood, still for a long moment, just staring at it. Then she walked forward and placed her hand on the rusted metal, the same gesture Quinn had made days earlier. "They were here," she whispered. "My parents stood here, planning their future." Quinn climbed inside and showed Kenna where she'd found the journal, the photographs, the letters. Kenna examined everything carefully, reading passages from the journal aloud, tracing her fingers over her parents' handwriting. "There was supposed to be a map," Quinn said. "Estelle mentioned it in one of the entries. I found markings on a tree outside, but I haven't followed them yet." They spent an hour searching the train car more thoroughly, moving aside debris, checking every possible hiding place. Finally, Kenna found it tucked into a gap between wall panels, a piece of oilcloth protecting a hand-drawn map. Quinn spread it out carefully. The map showed the area around the train car, with trails and landmarks marked, and in red ink, someone had drawn an X about half a mile into the deeper woods, near an old creek bed. "What do you think is there?" Kenna asked. "I don't know," Quinn said. "But your mother marked it for a reason, and there's something else I need to tell you." She explained about Vernon, about his memories of that time, about the rumors that had circulated. She told Kenna about the figure she'd seen watching the train car, about the carved message on the tree. Kenna listened carefully, then said, "We need to go to that spot. Whatever's there, I need to see it." "It could be dangerous," Quinn warned. "If there's evidence of what happened, it might implicate my family. And my father, your uncle, he might still be watching this area." "I don't care," Kenna said. "I need to know." They left the train car and began following the map, moving deeper into the forest. The terrain became rougher, and Quinn had to stop frequently to catch her breath. The baby was heavy, pressing against her lungs, and the uneven ground made every step an effort. Kenna noticed and suggested they turn back, but Quinn refused. She'd come this far. She wouldn't stop now. The creek bed was exactly where the map showed it would be, mostly dry this time of year, but still damp in the deepest parts. The X marked a spot on the near bank, under an old cedar tree. "Here," Quinn said, pointing. They stood looking at the spot for a moment. The ground was covered in decades of fallen needles and moss, showing no obvious signs of disturbance. But when Quinn looked more carefully, she could see that the moss pattern was slightly different in this area, as if the ground had been disturbed long ago and nature had slowly covered the evidence. "We need tools," Kenna said. "Shovels, maybe a metal detector." "Vernon has those," Quinn said. "He's helped me before. We could ask him to meet us here." They hiked back to Quinn's cabin, and Quinn used her radio to contact Vernon. She explained what they'd found, and he agreed to come with equipment. He arrived 2 hours later, his truck loaded with tools. Vernon studied the map, then looked at Kenna with recognition. "You look just like her," he said quietly. "Just like Estelle." "You knew my mother?" Kenna asked. "I did. She was a good person. She didn't deserve what happened to her." The three of them hiked back to the marked location. Vernon brought a metal detector, and he swept the area carefully. The detector beeped strongly in one spot, about 2 feet from where the X was marked. They began to dig. The soil was soft from recent rains, rich with decomposed organic matter. About 2 feet down, Vernon's shovel struck something metal. He cleared away more soil, revealing a rusted hunting knife. Quinn picked it up with shaking hands, turned it over, and found initials carved into the wooden handle. B.D. Bernard Dovall. Her father's knife. "That's evidence," Vernon said quietly. "That places him at this location." They kept digging. More carefully now, a few inches deeper, they found scraps of fabric, rotted remnants of clothing, then buttons, copper and tarnished, and then, unmistakably, bone fragments. Kenna made a sound like she'd been hit, stumbling backward. Quinn caught her arm, steadying her. "We need to stop," Vernon said. "This is a crime scene. We need to contact authorities." "No," Quinn said. Not yet. We need to know everything first. They dug more carefully, marking where they found each item. Nearby, they discovered a small metal box, locked and heavily corroded. Vernon pried it open with a screwdriver. Inside, protected from the elements, were more letters from Thomas to Estelle, apparently never delivered, and a birth certificate. Quinn pulled it out carefully. It was for Kenna Whitfield, born the 15th of July, 1974, at Harbour Ridge Hospital. Mother, Estelle Dovall. Father, Thomas Whitfield. This is your original birth certificate, Quinn said, handing it to Kenna. Before the adoption, before your name was changed, this is proof of who you really are. Kenna held the document with trembling hands, tears streaming down her face. My name was Kenna Whitfield, she whispered. I had parents who loved me, who died for me. They also found a note in Thomas's handwriting, the paper protected by being wrapped in plastic. If you find this, know we tried. They wouldn't let us be. Tell our daughter we loved her. Tell her we fought to keep her. Quinn sat back on her heels, overwhelmed. The evidence was all here, proof that Bernard Dovall had been at this location, proof that Estelle and Thomas had been buried here, proof that they'd been murdered to protect the family's reputation and control. What do we do now? Kenna asked. We document everything, Vernon said. He pulled out his phone and began taking photographs. We mark this location on GPS, and then we decide whether to involve the police or handle this another way. They killed my parents, Kenna said, her voice shaking with rage. They murdered them and buried them like they were nothing, like they didn't matter. They mattered, Quinn said firmly. They mattered to each other, and they mattered to you. And now we're going to make sure everyone knows what happened. We're going to give them the justice they deserve. As they carefully reburied the remains, they would need to preserve the site for official investigation. Quinn noticed something else. Carved into the cedar tree above the burial site were fresh symbols, the same style as the truth carving she'd seen near the train car. These symbols formed words. Witness. Remember. Vernon saw them too. Someone's been maintaining this site, he said. Someone's known about this all along. The Watcher, Quinn said. She looked around the forest, half expecting to see the tall figure, but the woods were empty, except for the three of them. As they hiked back to the cabin, Quinn's mind was racing. She had evidence now, real proof of what had happened. But bringing it to the authorities meant confronting her father, meant potentially destroying what remained of the Dovall family name. It meant opening wounds that had been sealed for 30 years. But looking at Kenna walking beside her, seeing the determination in her cousin's face, Quinn knew there was no other choice. The truth had to come out. Estelle and Thomas deserved to be remembered, not as people who ran away, but as victims of violence and prejudice. At the cabin, they spread out all the evidence on Quinn's table. The knife, the birth certificate, the final note, photographs of the burial site. It was overwhelming. Undeniable. I'm going to call the sheriff, Vernon said. This is beyond what we can handle ourselves. Wait, Quinn said. Before we do that, there's something I need to do first. I need to confront my father. I need to hear him admit what he did. That's not safe, Vernon protested. If he's capable of murder, he's 82. He's old, Quinn said. And I'm his daughter. He won't hurt me. But I need to look him in the eye and tell him I know. I need to give him a chance to tell the truth, even if it's 50 years too late. Kenna nodded slowly. I want to be there. I want him to see me. I want him to know that his family couldn't erase me, couldn't make me disappear. Quinn looked at this woman, who was, by blood and by grief, her family. Then we'll go together, she said. Tomorrow. We'll drive to my father's house, and we'll tell him we know everything. That night, Quinn barely slept. She lay in bed, feeling the baby move, thinking about what she would say to Bernard. She hadn't spoken to him in 30 years. She'd walked away from that house, from that family, and she'd never looked back. But now she was going back, not as a supplicant or a rebellious daughter, but as someone seeking justice for the dead. The drive to Bernard Dovall's house took 3 hours, winding through the mountains and down, to the valley where the old Dovall estate still stood. Quinn hadn't been here since she was 18, but she remembered every turn of the road, every landmark. Some things you can't forget, no matter how hard you try. The house was exactly as she remembered it, a large Victorian-style home painted white with a wraparound porch and gardens that had once been meticulously maintained. Now they showed signs of neglect, overgrown in places, though someone still kept the worst of the wilderness at bay. Kenna sat beside her in the truck, silent and tense. Vernon had wanted to come too, but Quinn had asked him to stay behind. This was family business, ugly as it was, and it needed to be handled by family. "That's where I grew up," Quinn said, staring at the house. "Every window was a prison. Every room was filled with expectations I could never meet." "Do you think he knows we're coming?" Kenna asked. "Probably. He always seemed to know everything." Quinn took a deep breath. "Ready." They climbed out of the truck and walked up the gravel driveway. Before they reached the porch, the front door opened. Bernard Dovall stood in the doorway, tall and straight despite his 82 years, his white hair still thick, his eyes as cold and assessing as Quinn remembered. "Quinn," he said. His voice was exactly the same, measured, controlled, giving nothing away. "I wondered when you'd come." "You knew I was looking," Quinn said. "It wasn't a question. I keep track of family, even the ones who try to leave." His gaze moved to Kenna, and something flickered in his expression, surprise, maybe, or recognition. "And you brought a guest." "This is Kenna Ross," Quinn said. "Though that's not her birth name. Her birth name was Kenna Whitfield. She's your niece, Estelle's daughter." Bernard's face went carefully blank. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," Quinn said, climbing the porch steps. "We found the train car. We found Estelle's journal. We found the letters from Thomas. And we found the burial site." She pulled the hunting knife from her bag. "We found your knife, Father, right where you left it 30 years ago." For the first time in Quinn's memory, her father's composure cracked. He stepped back, his hand gripping the doorframe. "You need to leave," he said. "Both of you." "Not until you tell us the truth," Kenna said, her voice strong despite the tears on her face. "Not until you admit what you did to my parents." Bernard stared at her for a long moment, and Quinn saw something she'd never seen before in her father's face, genuine emotion. Fear, maybe, or regret. "You look like her," he said quietly. "You look exactly like Estelle." "I know," Kenna said. "I've seen the photographs. I've read her journal. I know she loved me. I know she wanted me. And I know you and your father took me from her and then killed her when she tried to get me back." "It wasn't supposed to happen that way," Bernard said, and his voice had lost its usual authority. He sounded old, tired. "It wasn't supposed to end like that." Quinn felt her heart pounding. "What do you mean? What actually happened?" Bernard looked at her, then at Kenna, then back at the house behind him, as if considering whether to let them in or shut the door in their faces. Finally, he stepped aside. "You'd better come in. This isn't a conversation for the porch." They followed him into the house, through the familiar hallway with its dark wood paneling and heavy furniture. He led them to the library, a room Quinn had always hated, her grandfather's room, where family judgments had been pronounced and punishments decided. Bernard sat heavily in a leather chair that had been his father's. Quinn and Kenna remained standing. "My father arranged the adoption," Bernard began, not looking at them. "He said it was the only way to handle the situation without scandal. Estelle had gotten involved with that native man, gotten herself pregnant. Father said the family couldn't tolerate it. The baby would be adopted, quietly, to a family we could trust. Estelle would move away, start over. That was the plan. But Estelle didn't agree, Quinn said. No. She fought us every step of the way. She threatened to go public, to embarrass the family. She said she'd take us to court, fight the adoption. Father couldn't allow that. Bernard's hands were clasped tightly in his lap. He asked me to talk to Thomas, to make him understand that he needed to disappear, to leave Estelle alone. I went to meet him that night, September 3rd, at the train car. What happened? Kenna's voice was barely a whisper. Thomas wouldn't back down. He said he had a lawyer, that they were going to fight for the baby. He said Estelle was meeting him there, that they were leaving together. We argued. It got physical. Bernard finally looked up at them, and his eyes were wet. I hit him. I didn't mean to, I just wanted him to listen. But he fell, hit his head on the corner of the train car, the metal edge. He went down, and he didn't get up. The room was silent except for the ticking of an old clock on the mantel. Estelle arrived while I was trying to figure out what to do, Bernard continued. She saw Thomas on the ground, saw me standing over him. She screamed. She attacked me, hitting me, calling me a murderer. I tried to stop her, to calm her down, but she wouldn't stop. She ran into the woods. I chased her. His voice broke. She fell. The ravine near the creek bed, it was dark. She didn't see it. She fell, and I heard her hit the bottom. By the time I got down there, she was gone. Quinn felt her legs give way and sat down hard on the sofa. You killed them both. It was an accident, Bernard said, but there was no conviction in his voice. Both of them. I never meant for anyone to die. I was just trying to protect the family. And then you buried them, Kenna said, her voice shaking with rage. You buried them like they were garbage, like they meant nothing. I panicked. I called Father, and he came with a truck. We moved the bodies. He said it was done, that we'd never speak of it again. He reported Estelle missing the next day, said she'd run off. Everyone assumed Thomas had gone with her. Bernard looked at Kenna, and tears were streaming down his face now. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything, but I'm sorry. You deserved better. They both did. Sorry? Kenna's voice rose. You're sorry? You murdered my parents and stole my entire identity, and you think sorry covers it? No, Bernard said. I know it doesn't. I've known for 50 years that what I did was unforgivable. I've lived with it every day. Quinn stood, her hands clenched into fists. Why didn't you just tell the truth? Why didn't you confess? Because Father said the family had to be protected, because I was young and stupid and I believed him. And then, as the years passed, it became easier to just bury it, to didvite, pretend it never happened. He looked at Quinn. Why do you think I let you go when you left? Why do you think I never tried to bring you back? Because you were right to run. This family was poison. I was poison. You still are, Quinn said. The difference is now we have proof. We have your knife. We have the burial site. We have Estelle's journal describing your threats. We have Thomas's letters. And we have Kenna, the living proof that you couldn't erase what you did. Bernard nodded slowly. What are you going to do? We're going to the authorities, Kenna said. We're going to tell them everything. You're going to pay for what you did. I know, Bernard said. I've been expecting it for a long time. He stood, moving like a man much older than his years. There's something else you should know. I wasn't the only one watching that train car. After Father died 10 years ago, I hired someone to keep an eye on it. I knew someday someone might find it, might start asking questions. When Quinn started going there, I knew it was over. I knew the truth would come out. The Watcher, Quinn said. That was someone you hired? An old ranger, retired. I paid him to make sure no one disturbed the site. But apparently he had his own ideas about justice. Bernard walked to his desk and pulled out an envelope. He left this for me last week, with a note saying his work was done. "I think you should have it." He handed the envelope to Quinn. Inside was a photograph recent, by the look of it, of Quinn standing in front of the train car. And underneath, a note in unfamiliar handwriting. "The truth will come out. Estelle and Thomas will be remembered. The daughter will know her parents loved her. My watch is ended." Quinn looked up at her father. "Who was he?" "His name was Joseph Whitfield," Bernard said. "Thomas's younger brother. He figured out what happened years ago, but he never had proof. When I hired him, he saw it as a chance to finally bring the truth to light. He's the one who's been leaving the carvings, the messages, guiding you." Kenna gasped. "My uncle, Thomas's brother, was watching over the site all this time?" Bernard nodded. "He said he made a promise to Thomas, to his family, that the truth would come out eventually. I guess he knew you'd be the one to find it, Quinn. He said you had your aunt's determination." Quinn stood, feeling emotionally exhausted but also clear about what came next. "We're leaving now. And tomorrow, we're going to the sheriff with everything we have. You can decide what you want to do, turn yourself in, run, whatever. But the truth is coming out, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." Bernard sat back down, looking defeated. "I won't run. I'm tired of running. Tell them whatever you need to tell them. I'll face whatever consequences come." As Quinn and Kenna walked back to the truck, Quinn looked back at the house one last time. It looked smaller now, less imposing, just an old building filled with old mistakes and old pain. "Are you okay?" she asked Kenna. "No," Kenna said, "but I will be. Now that I know the truth, now that I know my parents loved me and fought for me, I'll be okay eventually." They drove back toward Quinn's cabin in silence, both processing what they'd learned. The truth wasn't what Quinn had expected. She'd thought her father was a cold-blooded killer, but instead, he was something more complex, a man who'd made terrible choices in a moment of panic and then compounded them with decades of lies. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it made him human in a way that was almost harder to bear. Quinn and Kenna returned to the cabin as evening fell, both emotionally drained from the confrontation. Vernon was waiting on the porch, and he stood as they pulled up, reading their faces. "What happened?" he asked. Inside, they told him everything. Bernard's confession, the accident that had spiraled into murder and cover-up, the revelation about Joseph Whitfield watching over the site for decades. Vernon listened gravely, his weathered hands clasped around a coffee mug. "So it's done," he said finally. "You have the truth. Tomorrow we go to the sheriff," Quinn said. "We bring all the evidence. We tell them where the burial site is, and we let the law handle it from there." But that night, as Quinn tried to sleep, she felt the first unmistakable twinges low in her belly. Braxton Hicks contractions, she told herself. False labor. The baby wasn't due for another 3 weeks. But as the hours passed and the contractions became more regular, more intense, she had to face the truth. Her baby was coming, and it was coming now. She got up, moving quietly so as not to wake Kenna, who was sleeping on the couch. But Kenna must have been sleeping lightly because she sat up immediately. "What's wrong?" she asked. "I think the baby's coming," Quinn said, trying to keep her voice calm. "It's too early, but the contractions are regular. About 10 minutes apart." Kenna was on her feet instantly. "We need to get you to a hospital." "How far is the nearest one?" "An hour and a half, maybe 2 on these roads at night," Quinn said. Another contraction gripped her, and she had to breathe through it. "I don't think we'll make it. This baby is coming fast." Vernon appeared in the doorway, already dressed despite the late hour. "I heard. I'll get my truck. We can try for the hospital in Harbour Ridge." But Quinn knew her body, knew the forest, knew that trying to make it down the mountain in labor was more dangerous than staying put. "No," she said firmly. "I'm having the baby here. I've prepared for this. I have everything I need." She'd spent months getting ready for a home birth, reading everything she could find, gathering supplies, mentally preparing herself for doing this alone if necessary. She'd never imagined it would happen like this, with Kenna and Vernon present, with the weight of the last few days pressing on her. But perhaps it was fitting. This baby would be born at the moment when old secrets were finally coming to light, when justice was finally being served, when family chosen and blood was being redefined. The contractions intensified over the next few hours. Quinn moved through them with a focus born of necessity, breathing, changing positions, letting her body do what it had been designed to do. Kenna stayed by her side, offering water, wiping her forehead, providing the kind of steady presence Quinn had never had from her own family. Vernon kept the fire going, boiled water, made sure everything Quinn might need was within reach. Between contractions, they talked about what would happen tomorrow, about the evidence they'd present to the sheriff, about what justice might look like after 30 years. "I want to make sure Estelle and Thomas get a proper burial," Kenna said. "Together, the way they should have been, with their real names, their real story told." "We'll make sure of it," Quinn promised. Another contraction gripped her, stronger than before. They were coming every 5 minutes now, building toward the climax. As dawn broke, painting the cabin in shades of gold and rose, Quinn felt the unmistakable urge to push. Kenna helped her into the position she'd planned on her knees, leaning against the bed, and Vernon stood by, ready to help however he could. "I can see the head," Kenna said, her voice filled with wonder. "Quinn, your baby's almost here." Quinn pushed with the next contraction, feeling the ancient power of birth moving through her. This was what Estelle had felt, bringing Kenna into the world. This was what women had done since the beginning of time, bringing new life into existence through pain and effort and love. Another contraction, another push. And then, with a final surge of effort that seemed to pull strength from somewhere beyond herself, Quinn felt the baby slip free. Kenna caught the infant, her hands gentle but sure. "It's a girl," she said, her voice breaking. "Quinn, you have a daughter." The baby let out a strong, indignant cry, announcing her arrival to the forest. Quinn reached back, and Kenna placed the warm, wet, perfect bundle into her arms. Quinn turned carefully, settling back against the bed, and looked down at her daughter's face. She was beautiful. Dark hair, like Quinn's, a perfect rosebud mouth, eyes that would open soon to see the world for the first time. Quinn felt her heart crack open with a love so fierce it took her breath away. "Hello," she whispered. "I'm your mother. I've been waiting for you." Kenna was crying openly now, Vernon too, though he tried to hide it by turning away to tend to the fire. In this moment, in this cabin, 3 people who'd been brought together by tragedy were witnessing the purest form of hope. New life, new beginnings, new possibilities. Quinn knew what she wanted to name her daughter. She'd known since reading Estelle's journal, since understanding the depth of her aunt's love and sacrifice. "Her name is Estelle," Quinn said, looking up at Kenna. "Estelle Thomas Dovall, for her great-aunt and great-uncle who should have had the chance to raise their own daughter but never did. For 2 people who loved each other despite everything the world tried to do to keep them apart." Kenna knelt beside the bed, reaching out to gently touch the baby's tiny hand. "She's perfect." They would have been so proud. Vernon brought warm blankets, and they cleaned the baby, made sure Quinn was comfortable, dealt with all the practicalities of birth. The placenta came easily, which Vernon carefully disposed of. Quinn nursed Estelle for the first time, marveling at the tiny mouth finding her breast, the instinct that guided them both. As morning light filled the cabin, Quinn felt something she'd never experienced before: complete peace. Despite everything, despite the pain of the last few days, despite the difficult truths that had been uncovered, in this moment she was exactly where she needed to be. "What happens now?" Kenna asked softly, still watching the baby with wonder. "Now we rest," Quinn said. "And then tomorrow we go tell the truth. We give Estelle and Thomas the justice they deserve. We make sure everyone knows what happened. And we make sure baby Estelle grows up knowing her family's story, all of it, the good and the bad." Vernon had been standing by the window, looking out at the forest. Now he turned back to them, his expression serious. "There's someone outside, at the tree line." Quinn felt a jolt of fear, but it quickly passed. She knew who it would be. "Let him come," she said. "It's time." Vernon opened the door, and after a moment, footsteps sounded on the porch. An elderly native man appeared in the doorway, tall, weathered, with long grey hair and eyes that held decades of grief and determination. He wore work clothes that seemed too large on his thin frame, and he carried himself with quiet dignity. "Joseph Whitfield," Quinn said. "Thomas's brother." He nodded. "I've been watching, waiting. I wanted to make sure you found everything, that the truth would finally come out." His gaze moved to Kenna, and his eyes filled with tears. "You look just like him, just like Thomas. And you have our grandmother's eyes." Kenna stood, moved toward him slowly. "You've been protecting the site, leaving the messages, guiding us. For 30 years, Joseph said. "I made a promise to my brother, to my family, that what happened wouldn't stay buried forever, that his daughter would someday know the truth." He looked at baby Estelle in Quinn's arms. "And now, new life, new hope. The cycle continues, but this time with truth instead of lies." He pulled a small bundle from his pocket, wrapped in soft duskin, tied with a leather cord. "This belonged to Thomas. Our grandmother made it for him when he was born. I want your daughter to have it. I want her to know that she comes from people who loved fiercely, who fought for what was right, who never gave up even when the world tried to break them." Kenna took the bundle and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a small carved cedar pendant in the shape of a whale, the symbol of the Quinault people. It was beautiful, aged and smooth from being handled, carrying the energy of generations. "Thank you," Kenna whispered, "for everything, for never giving up." Joseph nodded. "Tomorrow you'll tell the authorities. They'll go to the site. They'll find the remains. There will be an investigation, maybe even charges if Bernard confesses. My brother and Estelle will finally be able to rest." He looked at Quinn. "You did what needed to be done. Both of you. You're stronger than the secrets that tried to bury you." He turned to leave, but Quinn called out, "Wait, won't you stay? Have some coffee? Meet your family properly?" Joseph smiled. The first real smile Quinn had seen from him. "I'd like that." They spent the morning together, 5 people bound by blood and choice and shared purpose. Joseph told stories about Thomas, about their childhood on the reservation, about the Quinault traditions their grandmother had taught them. Kenna listened hungrily, learning about a heritage she'd been denied her entire life. Vernon made breakfast while Quinn nursed the baby and rested. And slowly, carefully, they began to plan what came next, how they would present the evidence, what they would say to the authorities, how they would ensure that Estelle and Thomas finally received the dignity they deserved. As afternoon approached, Joseph stood to leave. "I'll come with you tomorrow," he said. "When you go to the sheriff, I'll tell them everything I know, everything I witnessed. It's time to finish this." After he was gone, Quinn lay on her bed with baby Estelle sleeping on her chest, Kenna sitting nearby, Vernon dozing in the chair by the fire. The cabin was warm and peaceful, filled with the kind of silence that comes after hard truths have been spoken and accepted. Tomorrow would bring challenges, the authorities, the investigation, maybe even a confrontation with what remained of the Dovall family. But tonight, they were safe. Tonight, they were together. Tonight, new life slept peacefully, unaware of the complicated legacy she'd been born into, but surrounded by people who would make sure she grew up knowing she was loved. The morning came too quickly. Quinn woke to baby Estelle's hungry cries, her body sore from birth but her mind clear. She nursed the baby while Kenna made coffee and Vernon checked his truck to make sure it was ready for the journey to Harbour Ridge. Joseph arrived just after dawn, carrying a bundle of sage. "For blessing," he explained, "before we go to face what comes next." They stood together outside the cabin as Joseph lit the sage, letting the smoke drift over them. He spoke words in the Quinault language that Quinn didn't understand, but she felt their weight, their significance. This was about more than just going to the authorities. This was about honoring the dead, about asking for guidance, about preparing themselves spiritually for the task ahead. "We carry them with us," Joseph said when he finished. "Estelle and Thomas walk beside us today. They will see justice done." Vernon had offered to stay at the cabin with baby Estelle, but Quinn refused. "She comes with us," she said firmly. "This is her legacy too. When she's old enough to understand, I want to be able to tell her she was there when the truth finally came out." They loaded into Vernon's truck, the most reliable vehicle among them, with Quinn holding the baby in the back seat and Kenna beside her. Joseph rode in front with Vernon. The bed of the truck was loaded with evidence: the journal, the letters, the photographs, the knife, and detailed notes about the burial site's location. The drive to Harbour Ridge took 2 hours. Plenty of time for second thoughts and doubts to creep in. What if the authorities didn't believe them? What if Bernard had already fled or called in favors to make this go away? What if the Dovall family's influence was still strong enough to bury the truth one more time? But every time Quinn felt fear rising, she looked down at baby Estelle's sleeping face and remembered why this mattered. This child would grow up knowing her family's true history. She would grow up in a world where justice had been served, where the truth was honored above reputation and convenience. The sheriff's department was housed in a modern building on the edge of town, all glass and steel that would have been unimaginable when Estelle and Thomas died. Vernon parked in the visitor lot, and they all climbed out, Quinn moving carefully with the baby in a sling against her chest. The desk sergeant looked up as they entered, taking in the unusual group: an elderly white man, a native elder, 2 women in their 50s, one clearly just days postpartum, and a newborn baby. "Can I help you?" he asked. "We need to speak to the sheriff," Quinn said. "We have information about a murder, 2 murders actually, from 1974. The sergeant's eyebrows rose. "That's a long time ago." "Yes, it is," Kenna said. "But the bodies were never found. Until now." The sergeant made a phone call, spoke in low tones, then gestured toward a row of chairs. "Sheriff Morrison will be with you shortly. Please have a seat." They waited for 20 minutes, Quinn rocking gently to keep baby Estelle content, before a door opened and a man in his 50s stepped out. He was tall and solidly built, with grey hair and a face that had seen enough of human nature to be surprised by very little. "I'm Sheriff Tom Morrison," he said. "I understand you have information about an old case." "Your father was sheriff in 1974, Quinn said, standing to face him. "When my aunt Estelle Dovall disappeared, he was supposed to investigate, but he didn't. Not really, because my grandfather paid him not to look too hard." Morrison's expression hardened. "Those are serious accusations." "I know," Quinn said, "but they're true, and I can prove it. We can prove all of it." Morrison led them to a conference room and called in 2 detectives. For the next 3 hours, Quinn and Kenna told the story from beginning to end. They presented Estelle's journal, Thomas's letters, the photographs. They showed the map and explained how they'd found the burial site. They presented Bernard's knife, carefully preserved in a plastic bag. Joseph spoke about his brother, about the investigation that never was, about the 30 years he'd spent watching over the gravesite because no one else would. The detectives took notes, asked questions, photographed the evidence. Sheriff Morrison listened to everything with an expression that was hard to read, professional detachment mixed with something that might have been shame. "My father died 5 years ago," he said finally. "I can't answer for what he did or didn't do in 1974. But I can tell you that if there are human remains at the location you've described, we'll recover them, we'll identify them if possible, and we'll investigate what happened, regardless of how long ago it was or who was involved." "Bernard Dovall confessed to me," Quinn said. "He admitted to killing both Thomas and Estelle. It was supposed to be an accident, but he covered it up. He and his father buried the bodies and reported them missing." Morrison nodded. "We'll need to interview him. Do you know where he is now?" "At his home. The old Dovall estate on Ridge Road. He said he wouldn't run." Quinn paused. "He's 82 years old. I don't think he has much fight left in him." "We'll send officers to bring him in for questioning," Morrison said. He looked at the evidence spread across the table, then back at Quinn and Kenner. "I want you to know, whatever my father did, or didn't do, this department will handle this properly. Those two people deserve justice, even if it's 50 years late." They were at the sheriff's department for most of the day. The detectives needed detailed statements from everyone. They needed GPS coordinates for the burial site. They needed to understand the chain of custody for all the physical evidence. By mid-afternoon, a forensics team had already been dispatched to the site in the woods. Baby Estelle woke and needed to be nursed, so Quinn found a quiet room and fed her, while Kenner continued answering questions. Vernon sat with Joseph in the waiting area, the two old men sharing the comfortable silence of people who'd lived long enough to know when words weren't necessary. As evening approached, one of the detectives came to find Quinn. "We've located Mr. Dovall," she said. "He's being brought in now. He's indicated he's willing to make a statement without a lawyer present. Would you like to be there when we interview him?" Quinn thought about it. Part of her wanted to face her father one more time, to hear him admit his crimes officially, on the record. But another part of her was done. She'd gotten the truth. She'd brought it to light. What happened next was for the law to decide. "No," she said finally, "I've said everything I need to say to him. This is between him and justice now." The detective nodded. "The forensics team has confirmed human remains at the site you described. It'll take time to make a positive identification, but preliminary examination suggests two individuals, buried approximately 30 to 50 years ago." "You were right." Quinn felt her eyes fill with tears. It was one thing to believe something, to know it in your heart. It was another to have it confirmed, to know that Estelle and Thomas had finally been found, that they could finally rest. Kenner appeared in the doorway, her face showing the same mix of grief and relief that Quinn felt. They embraced the baby. Between them, 3 generations, linked by blood and truth and love. By the time they left the sheriff's department, it was dark. Morrison had told them the investigation would take weeks, maybe months. Bernard was being held for questioning, and charges would likely be filed once the forensics report was complete. The remains would be identified through DNA, if possible, through dental records and other means. "We'll keep you informed," Morrison had promised. "And we'll make sure this is done right." They drove back toward Quinn's cabin in silence, everyone exhausted by the emotional weight of the day. Baby Estelle slept peacefully, unaware of the history being made on her behalf. As they wound up into the mountains, Quinn looked out at the dark forest and thought about Estelle and Thomas, about how they'd walked these same roads, loved under these same trees, died in these same woods. But now, their story would be told. Now, they would be remembered. When they reached the cabin, Joseph helped Vernon build up the fire, while Kenner heated soup she'd made that morning. They ate together, this makeshift family, talking quietly about what came next. "There will be a funeral," Joseph said. "When the remains are released, a proper one, with traditional ceremonies. Thomas should be buried on tribal land with his ancestors. and Estelle should be beside him, the way she wanted. "The Dovalls will object," Quinn said. "My father's family, what's left of them, they'll want Estelle buried in the family plot." "Let them object," Kenna said fiercely. "She's my mother. I'm her next of kin. And she's going to be buried with the man she loved, the father of her child." "That's final." Quinn nodded. "I'll stand with you. Whatever you decide, I'll support it." Over the next 3 days, while they waited for news from the sheriff's department, life in the cabin fell into a rhythm. Quinn recovered from birth, learning the patterns of her daughter's needs, feeding every 2 hours, sleeping in short bursts, the endless cycle of diapers and soothing and wonder at this tiny person she'd created. Kenna stayed, helping with the baby, cooking meals, gradually learning how to be an aunt, how to be family. She and Quinn talked for hours about their lives, about the years they'd lost, about the future they could build together. Joseph visited daily, bringing gifts for baby Estelle, a blessing bundle of cedar and sage, a soft blanket woven by his sister, a carved rattle that had belonged to Thomas as a child. He taught them Quinault words, told stories about his people's history, helped Kenna begin to understand the heritage that had been stolen from her. Vernon continued to check on them, bringing supplies, offering his quiet strength and practical help. He'd become like a grandfather to baby Estelle, and Quinn saw how the baby's presence brought him joy. On the 4th day, Sheriff Morrison called. "We have a positive identification on both sets of remains," he said. "DNA comparison with samples from Miss Ross confirmed one set as Estelle Dovall. We're working with the Quinault Nation to identify Thomas Whitfield, but preliminary findings are consistent with your account." "What about Bernard?" Quinn asked. "He's been formally charged with 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter and 2 counts of abuse of a corpse. He's out on bail, given his age and health. The judge allowed it. The prosecutor is reviewing whether additional charges are warranted. It'll go to trial probably in 6 to 8 months." Quinn hung up and relayed the news to Kenna. They held each other, crying tears of grief for what had been lost, tears of relief that justice was finally coming, tears of gratitude that they'd found each other. That evening, Quinn sat on her porch with baby Estelle in her arms, watching the sun set over the mountains. Kenna sat beside her, and Joseph stood at the edge of the clearing, facing the forest. He was singing, his voice low and melodic, words in Quinault that seemed to merge with the sound of the wind in the trees. "What's he singing?" Quinn asked. "A journey song," Kenna said softly. "For spirits that are traveling home, for people who got lost and are finally finding their way back." Quinn looked down at her daughter, at this perfect, innocent being who carried such a complicated legacy. "I'm going to tell you everything," she whispered to the baby. "When you're old enough to understand, I'll tell you about your great-aunt Estelle, who was brave and strong and loved deeply. I'll tell you about Thomas, who stood up for what he believed in. I'll tell you about your cousin Kenna, who was stolen from her parents but found her way back to the truth. And I'll tell you about justice, how sometimes it takes a long time, but it's always worth fighting for." Baby Estelle made a small sound, her tiny hand grasping Quinn's finger. In that moment, Quinn felt the presence of everyone who'd come before Estelle and Thomas, all the ancestors whose choices and sacrifices had led to this moment, this child, this new beginning. Joseph finished his song and turned back to them. "They heard," he said simply. "They know, and they are at peace now." The next morning, Quinn made a decision. She would take Kenna and baby Estelle to the train car one last time before it was officially designated as part of the crime scene investigation. She wanted Kenna to spend time in the place where her parents had loved each other, where they'd planned their future. She wanted baby Estelle to be there too, to complete the circle. They hiked out slowly, Quinn carrying the baby in a sling, Kenna walking beside her. The forest was beautiful in the morning light, golden and green and alive. When they reached the train car, they stood in silence for a long moment. Then Kenna climbed inside. Quinn followed, and they sat together in the space where Estelle had written her journal, where Thomas had kept his letters, where two people had dreamed of a life free from prejudice and control. "Thank you," Kenna said, her hand on the wall of the train car. "Thank you for loving me, for fighting for me, for never giving up. I wish I could have known you, but I know you now, and I promise I'll make sure your story is told. I promise your granddaughter will grow up knowing who you were." Quinn felt tears sliding down her face. She held baby Estelle close and added her own words. "You weren't forgotten, you were loved, and now everyone will know what happened to you. You'll be remembered for who you really were, not the lies that were told about you." As they left the train car for the last time, Quinn looked back and saw sunlight streaming through the gaps in the walls, illuminating dust motes in the air. For just a moment, she thought she saw two figures standing in that light, a woman and a man, holding hands, watching them go. She blinked, and they were gone. But the message was clear. Estelle and Thomas had waited a long time for this moment, and now, finally, they were free. 3 weeks passed. The investigation continued, generating headlines in the local papers and even some regional news coverage. The story of the Dovall family's dark secret, of two lovers killed and buried to protect reputation, of a daughter stolen and a 30-year cover-up, it captured people's imagination and their sympathy. Bernard Dovall was awaiting trial, his lawyers arguing that his advanced age and deteriorating health should be considered. The prosecutor was pushing for a prison sentence despite his age. Public opinion was divided. But Quinn found she didn't care much about the legal proceedings anymore. She'd done what she needed to do. She'd uncovered the truth, brought it to light, and now she was focused on the future rather than the past. The funeral for Estelle and Thomas was held on a clear November day. The Quinault nation had agreed to allow Estelle to be buried on tribal land, beside Thomas, recognizing that her wishes and her relationship deserved to be honored. It was a small ceremony, attended by Quinn, Kenna, Vernon, Joseph, and members of Thomas's extended family who'd gathered to honor him. A tribal elder led the service, speaking in both Quinault and English about love that transcends death, about justice delayed but not denied, about the importance of truth and memory. They buried Estelle and Thomas side by side, their coffins carved with symbols from Thomas's heritage and flowers that Estelle had loved. On the shared headstone, Kenna had insisted on specific wording: Estelle Dovall and Thomas Whitfield, united in love, divided by hate, reunited in peace. Parents of Kenna Whitfield, Ross, 1948 to 1974 and 1947 to 1974. They loved deeply and fought bravely. They are not forgotten. As Quinn stood at the graveside, holding baby Estelle, she thought about cycles, how pain can echo through generations, but so can healing, how secrets can poison a family, but truth can set it free, how loss can devastate, but love can rebuild. After the funeral, they gathered at Joseph's home on the reservation for a meal. It was Quinn's first time there, and she was struck by the warmth, the sense of community, the way people welcomed her and Kenna despite their connection to the family that had caused so much pain. "You're not responsible for what your father and grandfather did," Joseph told her. "You're responsible for what you do, and you did the right thing. You brought truth to light. That matters." In the weeks that followed, Quinn and Kenna settled into a new rhythm. Kenna began visiting the cabin regularly, sometimes staying for days at a time. She taught Quinn about Thomas's heritage, about Quinault traditions and history. She helped care for baby Estelle, learning the intimacy of family that she'd never quite felt with the Rosses. And slowly, carefully, Kenna began the process of connecting with the Quinault nation, of reclaiming the heritage that had been stolen from her. It was complicated. 50 years was a long time to be away, and she was not enrolled and didn't have the documentation needed for enrollment. But Joseph's family welcomed her, taught her, helped her find her place. Vernon continued to be their rock, checking in daily, bringing supplies, offering wisdom and practical help. He'd become grandfather, uncle, and friend, all rolled into one, and Quinn couldn't imagine navigating this new life without him. The train car was eventually removed by the County Historical Society, which wanted to preserve it as part of the region's history. Before it was taken away, Quinn and Kenna visited one last time. They planted a cedar sapling nearby, a living memorial to Estelle and Thomas. On a plaque beside it, they'd placed a simple inscription: "Here, Estelle and Thomas dreamed of freedom. Their love could not be destroyed. Their truth could not be buried forever. Remember them." As winter approached, Quinn sat in her cabin one evening with baby Estelle asleep on her chest. Kenna was at the stove making dinner, humming softly. Vernon had just left after bringing a cord of firewood. Joseph would visit tomorrow, bringing salmon he'd caught and more stories to tell. Quinn thought about how different her life had become. In just a few months, she'd bought a train car on impulse, following dreams she didn't understand. She'd uncovered secrets that had been buried for 3 decades. She'd found family she didn't know existed. She'd given birth to a daughter who would grow up knowing the truth, knowing her heritage, knowing she was loved without conditions. The isolation Quinn had treasured for so long had transformed into something richer. She was still in her cabin in the woods, still living off-grid, still surrounded by the forest she loved. But now she was connected to Kenna, to Joseph and his family, to Vernon, to a web of relationships that supported rather than suffocated her. Baby Estelle stirred and opened her eyes, looking up at Quinn with that unfocused newborn gaze that seemed to see everything and nothing. Quinn stroked her daughter's soft cheek, marveling at the perfect wholeness of her. "You're going to grow up different than I did," she whispered. "You're going to grow up knowing where you come from, all of it, the good and the bad. You're going to know about Estelle and Thomas, about love that was strong enough to challenge prejudice, about truth that couldn't stay buried. And you're going to know that family isn't just blood. It's the people who show up, who care, who choose to love you." Kenna brought plates to the table. "Dinner's ready. You want to eat before she needs to nurse again." Quinn stood carefully and joined Kenna at the table. Through the window, she could see the forest in the fading light, the trees standing tall and patient as they had for centuries. Somewhere out there was the spot where Estelle and Thomas had fallen, where their bodies had lain for 30 years. But now there was also a young cedar tree growing, reaching toward the sky, a symbol of life continuing, of hope renewed. "I was thinking," Kenna said as they ate, "about the spring. When the weather's better, I'd like to build a small cabin on your land, if you'd let me. Not too close, you'd still have your privacy, but near enough that we could see each other regularly. Near enough that Estelle could grow up knowing her cousin, knowing her family." Quinn felt warmth spread through her chest. "I'd like that. This land is big enough for both of us. For all of us." They spent the rest of the evening making plans where the cabin would go, how they would build it, what it would look like. They talked about teaching baby Estelle about the forest, about Quinault traditions, about her complicated heritage. They talked about justice and healing and the future. Later, after Kenna had gone to sleep on the couch and baby Estelle was settled for the night, Quinn sat at her table and opened her journal. She'd been keeping a record of everything for herself, for her daughter, for anyone who might someday want to know the truth about what had happened. She wrote about the day's events, about the funeral, about the cedar tree they'd planted. And then she wrote a letter to Estelle. Both Estelle's, the aunt she'd never known, and the daughter sleeping in the next room. "Dear Estelle," she wrote, "your story doesn't end with tragedy. It ends with truth, with justice, with family reunited. Your daughter knows you loved her. Your great niece will grow up hearing your story. You weren't erased. You're remembered. And the love you and Thomas shared, that love changed everything. It brought Kenna into the world. It brought me to the truth. It created connections that never would have existed otherwise. So thank you. Thank you for being brave. Thank you for loving deeply. Thank you for fighting, even when you knew you might lose. Your life mattered. You mattered. And we will make sure no one ever forgets that. She closed the journal and looked around her cabin at the fire burning low in the stove, at the baby sleeping peacefully, at the evidence of life being lived with intention and love. Outside, the forest stood guard, ancient and patient, keeping its own secrets and its own time. Quinn placed her hand on her belly, which was still soft from pregnancy, and then on her heart. She'd given birth to more than just a baby in these past weeks. She'd given birth to truth, to justice, to a new understanding of what family could be. And in the quiet of the cabin, surrounded by forest and love and the weight of history finally acknowledged, Quinn felt something she'd been searching for her entire life. She felt at peace. The past had been uncovered. The dead had been honored. The living had been healed. And the future, that beautiful, uncertain future, stretched out before them, full of possibility and hope. Baby Estelle would grow up knowing she came from strength, from courage, from love that refused to be destroyed. She would grow up with Quinn's independence and Kenna's resilience and the wisdom of elders like Vernon and Joseph. She would grow up free of the lies that had poisoned the Dovall family for generations. And somewhere, Quinn believed, Estelle and Thomas were watching. Not as ghosts haunting the woods, but as ancestors who'd completed their journey, who could finally rest knowing their story had been told, their love had been vindicated, and their daughter and their daughter's daughter would carry forward the truth they'd died trying to protect. The wind whispered through the trees outside, and for just a moment, Quinn thought she heard voices on that wind. Not sad voices, but joyful ones, free ones. The voices of people who'd been lost and were finally found, who'd been silenced and could finally speak, who'd been buried and had finally risen into memory and honor. Quinn smiled, holding the sound in her heart. Then she turned off the lamp, checked on baby Estelle one more time, and climbed into bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments of learning how to be a mother, how to be family, how to live in truth rather than secrets. But tonight, she slept peacefully, surrounded by love, connected to past and future, finally home in the deepest sense of the word.